Hi, everybody. I'm Graeme Codrington. Welcome to another in my series of Workplace Culture 2021 Conversations. Great to have you along with us. If you're joining us live, please make yourself comfortable, settle in, and why don't you hop across to the chat box? Just let us know where you are dialing in from today. Just say hi. The benefit of being live is you can chat to us. You can ask questions as we go along. If you're watching the replay, it's great to have you along as well. Who is us? Well, today I am interviewing Zaneli Njapa. Zaneli, it's great to have you joining me. I'm in Johannesburg. You are joining us from Durban today. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you so much for having me, Graeme.
How's COVID treating you? What a great question.
Right? Well, all things considered, I think we trudge on and we do what we can. So not too many complaints.
Yeah, well, I suppose that's the theme of the session today, is that I've been talking to a whole lot of clients over the last few weeks, months, I suppose, and I suppose we all had a dream that COVID might just be COVID 2020. And that when we got to the end of this year, COVID would understand how the calendar works. We could hit the reset button on New Year's Eve, and we could go into 2021 all sorted. Yeah, that's not going to happen, right? Sadly. COVID looks as if it's in the Northern Hemisphere at the moment. It's making its second or even third wave comeback in some places. I'm nervous for what might happen in the Southern Hemisphere winter next year when we might be done with COVID. COVID is not done with us, sadly. And as I'm speaking to people and they're starting to think about 2021 or right in the middle of planning for 2021, a lot of people are realizing this. A lot of people are realizing we can't just grit our teeth, power through, and then somehow magically normal will come back next year. We have to prepare ourselves for continued disruption. Maybe not deep levels of lockdown, maybe not the chaos of 2020, but certainly the current state of disruption, which includes virtual working and remote teams. It's including ongoing disruption with our kids' schooling and with our places of worship and with our, places to go. So we can't really go on holiday internationally because you're risking being caught in quarantine, et cetera, et cetera. And when we apply this to our thinking around our teams, these are the questions I'm getting. How do we do this, Graeme? How do we set ourselves up in 2021 to really deal with disruption as normal, to deal with these issues? And so that's what this series is about. And that's, Zaneli, why I'm so thrilled to be speaking to you today. Zaneli Njapa is called the Unlearning Lady, a very cool title. I'm very jealous of that title. Unlearning, I'm sure we'll talk about it a bit in the session, is one of my key things that I try to do is not just focus on learning, but unlearning, which means changing habits and changing mindsets and changing systems. Zaneli is one of the team at Tomorrow Today, so one of my colleagues, and she and I work closely together. But Zaneli's really carved out a niche for herself over the last few years in the space of dealing with disruption, dealing with transitions. So forget even a COVID issue. Whenever there's a disruption in your normal, in your career, in your industry, in your market, Zaneli is the person to speak to. So, Zaneli, let me stop speaking about you and start speaking to you. The reason I wanted to talk to you is because I'm sure that you've got some insights that are going to help people who are struggling, especially people who might think, we were forced to be disrupted. We were forced into this virtual working space. A new culture has begun to emerge, maybe just by itself, or maybe we've been more deliberate in about putting new practices, new approaches to meetings and communications and so on. But we're still getting resistance. People are not enjoying it. What do we do? What do we do now? If we know we're going to have to be disrupted for most of 2021 and people are not enjoying this space that we thought was going to be temporary and now it looks like it's going to be longer. I know it's a huge question, but where should people start if they are realizing that this workplace culture thing they're struggling with it? Right. Talking about disruption, this happened on the last webinar as well. I hope it's not anything that I did. As you can see, Zaneli has left the room. I'm sure she'll be back in a moment. This is part of what we're talking about, right? That you've got to continually deal with disruptions all the time. Have plan B. Hey, Zaneli, we can pretend we planned that. At the moment, how do you deal with disruption? You left the room, and I think it was something you were teaching me, right? How to deal with disruption in the moment. But anyway, the question stands: if we are dealing with resistance to disruption and change, what do we do?
Cool. So I think the first thing and the first place to start really is to understand that disruption is something that happens. And as a result, resistance is something that you're definitely going to get, because no one likes to be told what to do and what not to do. And I love to give this example, Graeme. You can try this with me, and everyone who's on the line can try this as well. Don't think about a purple elephant. Don't think about it. Don't think about its big purple floppy ears. Don't think about its cute purple tail. Don't think about it spraying water out of its cute purple trunk.
Stop, you're messing with me now.
How did that work out, though?
I try to think of a pink giraffe, but there's an elephant standing in the way.
Exactly. So that's literally how resistance works. And that's what so many of the organizations that I work with are really starting to see, that we've got this resistance that's coming in different forms, and people are pushing back. Because that's what change does. What we feel when we are required to change or transition is this sense of a loss of autonomy. So everyone wants to feel that they are making their own choices. And this is something that's really important for leaders to note, because when people go through change, they feel this loss of a sense of certainty, a sense of ownership around their own narratives. And so that resistance then comes as a result of, how do I know that this is going to work? How do I know that this is the best thing for me at this time and with what's going on? So that's the first part that I want people to really start to understand, is that people that resist are not necessarily the enemy. As I like to say, they're not necessarily the enemy, but they really start to help you and I to understand exactly where some of the barriers to change can be, because it's the individuals that have noticed these barriers to change that actually tend to resist. I mean, I worked with the client just yesterday who was saying that I've been picking up a lot of resistance from my team, Zaneli, what do I do? And the funny thing, he said that I'm noticing this resistance from individuals that have been a part of my team for the longest time. And I said, that's exactly it. Because those are the individuals that understand the workings of the organization and have really looked at what you've got so far. And they say, we don't feel equipped to make this change. So that's just one thing. And the other thing is that a lot of the time what you find is that these individuals have associated this change with the sense of loss. So we've become so used to the way that we used to do things. What do we do now? We stand to lose so much. And so I always say that during times of resistance, it's so important for leaders to exercise this kind of empathy that really encourages a sit-down conversation with these individuals that are resisting. Or because what you find is that resistance can sort of grow little legs within teams and organizations. And I see this all the time, and I'm sure you have, is that it grows legs and it starts to spread. So the sooner that you and I can not only note this resistance, but find out where it's coming from and then work from there. Because a lot of the time I've got my LEAP principles that I'm sure you know about, Graeme. And one of the first in this acronym is live vision. Because unless the vision of where we're going as an organization is alive to me as an individual, there is no way that I'm going to climb on board that. So I think that the resistance part is really, really interesting, but there are a lot of key insights that teams can start to draw from anyone who's showing any kind of resistance.
Now, I think that part of that is something that you kind of switched me onto, and that is the concept of rituals. So rituals might have other words. They might be habits, they might be orthodoxies, but specifically it's around a particular set of activities or actions or processes that were normal, that were standard, that were rituals. You might not have even thought about them. And that can be part of the loss as well, isn't it? That people feel that those rituals are missing. And what we also need to do is then work out, how do we create new rituals? I don't know, maybe let me phrase this even as a question. Do we just replace the old rituals? So a ritual might be everybody arrives 15 minutes before designated start time, and you all queue up to get your coffee, and you chat and talk about the sport and the weather and whatever else. That was a ritual. We're missing that now. Do we recreate that in the virtual world, or do we look for new rituals? And is that part of the resistance then? That maybe we're not doing that particular thing correctly?
That's a very good question, Graeme. And whenever we're disrupted, and this is a great insight around culture and organizational cultures, that cultures within organizations are not set. And that's exactly what some of us have come to the realization of during COVID-19 and during any kind of disruption. That culture, just like anything else in our environments, is malleable and speaks consistently to where we are as teams at the time. So you don't necessarily take those exact same rituals and recreate them, because unfortunately you don't necessarily have a water cooler in the house where we can all gather and gossip about the boss. So unfortunately those things do tend to sort of take a step back. But the great thing that you can do is you can understand what your new environment allows and then create new rituals around that. I mean, I've worked with teams that now do a funky hat Friday. So every time when we have a meeting, we all put on a funky hat and try to make it a different one every Friday. And that becomes a kind of ritual that really represents us sitting around a table and speaking to each other. Because what rituals do is they solidify a sense of culture and a sense of ownership around the narrative that we have as a team. And so I found them to be very, very powerful tools that individuals can use. But another thing about rituals as well, Graeme, is that rituals are really great when you want to change, because if you want to create any kind of lasting change on an individual level, but also on an organizational level, unless it's supported by rituals that act as kind of anchors, if you can see them as that, then there's no lasting to that, because there's nothing that's going to anchor in a person's mind to say that our new narrative around where we're going, looking into 2021, looks like this. I know we've got this to hold on to. And rituals really get a really great buy-in from individuals. Obviously, they don't necessarily start off as habitual, but they gain momentum, and over time, people tend to start to get used to them, and they become very dear to most people's hearts eventually.
It almost sounds too easy. Or in fact, hang on, that's not the right way to phrase it. Easy is the wrong word. Or too simple almost. That, we're supposed to, we're dealing with such big disruption. We're trying to sort out what feels like such big problems. Yet maybe there's a simplicity in some of the solutions, and maybe that's just the key that people are missing. I mean, what are some of the other things that could help people manage this transition from what our world used to be like to whatever it is emerging? And I'm fascinated that it feels that it could be quite simple. It just requires focus, I think, from leadership, right?
Yes, it does. And not just leadership, because the last part of my LEAP framework is all about participation. So how do we put skin in the game? How do we make sure that we get fully involved and rally behind our new narrative as we go into 2021 and the rest of the 2020s, which are a decade of disruption entirely. And we can't just isolate 2020, as you said before. So I think that the one thing that I want to encourage teams to do, and as we all sit on this call, is to understand, firstly, that change happens better when we sort of socialize around the change. So there was a study that was done at Colorado State University, and they found that one of the biggest things that actually influenced change, or one of the biggest variables around why people change, is because the people around them that are closest to them have made a change that they want to change. So one of the experiments or the studies that they did was that they looked into those hotel rooms, and sometimes in the hotel room they ask you to either leave your towel on the bed if you've used it, or do a certain little minor behavior or habit change that can be actually quite difficult because you're so used to doing things in a different way. So what they did is they actually started to put up these little signs, and you may have seen these before. The ones that say 80% of people who have been in this room, the exact same room that you've been in, have hung their towel after, or have laid the towel on the bed after they've used it. And what that does, because you and I are social beings, it really triggers that sense of ownership, that sense of belonging. Because at the end of the day, nobody doesn't want to be a part of something that's moving ahead, moving forward, going towards a new direction. We all want to belong. But a lot of the time what happens is that individuals that resist any kind of transition is because they don't see where it's going, or there is this misalignment, if you can call it that, between where they see themselves going in terms of their own vision and then where they see the organization going. So this is where I usually like to say organizations must start. Really start to understand where your people see themselves going. And are you speaking to that? Because buy-in from the individuals within our teams at this time is so critical, especially, the volatility of the times that we're going through really mean that at the individual level, everyone is starting to question, not just, I've launched a poll the other day that found that most people are asking themselves the questions about their purpose as individuals, because that's what happens during times of disruption. Everyone starts to look in. And if you as a business wanting everyone to transition are failing to encourage them to look in, but you're also not looking into them, then there's this consistent disconnect where they feel like you're talking at them and they're not marrying those two and then walking with everyone forward. So there are a good few rituals that teams can create. Anything around the laptop or the mornings that we spend, whether it's a coffee on a certain day, maybe we have a 10-minute check-in, those types of things start to become consistent rituals that anchor people into the moment, anchor people into where they're going, and build these kind of virtual or even hybrid cultures around the work that we're doing.
Zaneli, in a moment, I want to get you to stop teasing all of us and give us the whole LEAP framework. You've given us the L, live action, and the P, but you can give us all four of them. That's what you do almost every day with your clients. So it'd be great to hear about that. But now, everybody else, you can see why I wanted to connect with Zaneli. She's a powerhouse of energy when she comes into the room. And I know, Zaneli, what you've worked hard to do is to gather all of these examples to get best practice from different clients, and then you can bring them to people and just help them. We need help right now because none of us have spent a second year in a global pandemic lockdown, I don't think. So we're all learning as we go along. And that's what we at the team at Tomorrow Today want to help you to do. If you are with us live now, you have the added advantage of being able to ask us questions. So hop along to the chat box and throw in a question for Zaneli if you have one. If you are watching the replay, and this is going to be a bit weird if you're watching us live, because if you're watching the replay, here's how to contact Zaneli right here. Okay, and I will put it here on the screen. For those of you who are live, go into the chat box. It's up at the top of the chat. You can see zaneliandjapa.com is the place to go. Okay, right. With that, a quick ad break over. Zaneli, what's the LEAP framework? I know that this is something that your clients have loved, and that's made a real difference to clients. So tell us, four things, right, that we do to manage transitions.
Yes. So, all right, let's get into it. The first one I did already mention. So the LEAP actually is an acronym, like you mentioned. So the first one is live vision. And that's really all about, like I mentioned, it's all about making sure that the vision, or wherever it is we're going, or Vision 2020, I've worked with teams that have a Vision 2035, whatever it is, make sure that it's alive for individuals. And when I say alive, that word, there's a lot of power behind that word, because it's saying that when I wake up in the morning, it's my reason for waking up. And how many of us can say that, right? So it needs to be at that level, especially in such vulnerable times of change. If it's not inculcating a fire within me, then there is no way that I'm going to back any kind of change process that you've got going on. So that's the first one. And then the second one, yes, Graeme.
Before you go on, so I'm hearing you say it's more than the company's vision, mission, values, purpose. This is about bringing that down to your team and maybe even to individuals in your team that have a sense of what is my contribution to the vision. And that's why it's a live vision. It's not this vision statement, but rather, where do I fit in that vision? Have I got that right?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's where do I fit in, and what's and what's my contribution to the greater whole? Because then it makes my little bit that I'm contributing not seem so maybe separated or siloed. And I feel like I'm contributing to something bigger than myself. And I mean, in the workplace today, people want to contribute to something that's beyond them, to something that will outlive them, if we can get a little bit cheesy and use that word. So the live vision really is all about that. Thanks, Graeme.
And I'm guessing that the last thing that will develop that vision is if your boss keeps telling you, well done, you are being so productive, you are doing all the things you're supposed to be doing. I'm so impressed that in the middle of COVID-19 crisis and you working from home, you're still able to do your job the way I expect you to do it. That doesn't feel like that's live vision to me. It feels like there needs to be something more than just, well done, Graeme, you're about as productive as I expect a cog in this machine to be.
Yeah, I guess you're onto something there, Graeme. Definitely. So there is a very big difference between that. And I think that that's where a lot of leaders are finding themselves. They're finding themselves in a position where they're going, okay, do I want productivity? And yes, obviously you do, but at what cost?
Yeah.
And that's really become a very big narrative, especially at this time. When I had an individual speak to me yesterday, said, Zaneli, I never used to trust my team, but COVID has put me in the deep end where I've had to go, okay, so they're probably working because I'm getting stuff back. And I went, yeah, that's what disruption sometimes does.
Yeah, nice. Okay, back to you. You were going to the E.
Yes. So the E is easy edible chunks. Now this one sounds a little bit simple, but actually it's extremely effective, because what it does when you and I chunk things up, and I've worked with clients where we've broken things up into Gantt charts, and we've looked at tracking all sorts of deliverables over time. And what this does is it allows this kind of momentum for teams to build. And also going back to that concept of autonomy that we spoke about, when I can personally understand where we are as a team according to the visions we collectively set, and I'll bring this up in participation, that we collectively set, then there's a sense of ownership within me that allows me to consistently fuel the vision going on as well. So that's what breaking up where we're going, breaking up our visions into small, easy, edible chunks, as I call it, does for a team, and even does for individuals. So I do this when I work with mentorship for individuals as well. And this is a very, very big one that creates that kind of momentum. And then the next one is acknowledgement, appreciation, and announcement. So appreciate, acknowledge, and announce. And this one is a very communication-centered one. I particularly really like this one because what I often say that is teams must be very careful about how they communicate during times of volatility. When everyone is on edge in teams, I mean, I'm a sarcastic person. I always say that I'm fluent in sarcasm, but I always say that don't be ambiguous during ambiguous times. Rather be unambiguous in your communication during ambiguous time, because everyone is on edge and everything that you say is going to make a very big difference as to how changes play out. So it's a very important thing to acknowledge that. So let me just break that one up a little bit and then we can carry on. So acknowledge is all about understanding what we've done and where we've come to. I had a client that came to me the other day and said, we've done a program before, but this is what we want to do with you. And I said, let's go back. Let's rather go back and acknowledge why the previous program didn't work so well. What happened there? And what do you think was some of the nook and cranny things that caused it not to be such a great success? Because often we don't do that. We don't go back to the things that we have practiced, the strategies we have worked with, the partnerships we have shared, and look at how those relationships are going to feed into where we are now. And that's one of the best things that anyone can do during a transition, is to take something with you into the future that reminds you of not just past successes, but also past lessons. And then the next one is appreciation, praise lavishly. I mean, don't go over the top, but make sure that you are lavish with your praise, because people want acknowledgement in times when everything is just sort of up in the air. I think we can call it that. Everything is up in the air. People want to know that they are doing what needs to be done. And the important thing about appreciation is that you want to appreciate or affirm in line with with the new narrative. So whatever it is that you praise openly needs to affirm to everyone else that, okay, that's the behavior that's getting rewarded, because that's how individuals work. And that's why the phrase exists, that you get what you reward. And so this one is very, very important. And because it not just fuels individuals to move further into the narrative that you want to create, but it also creates a sense of achievement. And we feel like we're consistently achieving. And the last thing, I know I can go on forever, but the last thing with this one is that what you find with any kind of habit creation, now going into some of the work that I do around transitions on an individual level, any kind of habit is made up of three things, if we can call it that. So it's a trigger or a cue, it's the behavior itself, and then it's the reward. So you and I do whatever we do under any circumstance because we understand that there's a reward. It can be a chemical reward or a feeling reward, or it can be something tangible. So it's very important for leaders to understand that this is something that drives individuals. And then the last one is announce. Speak openly about what's going on. Make sure that there's transparency at all times. And then the very last in the framework is participation. And this is the one I've been waiting to get to. And let me come back to this three-part habit framework before I bring you in, Graeme. I'd love to hear what some of your thoughts are on this. This three-part framework is that if you look at what makes up any kind of behavior or habit, you'll remember I said there's a trigger and a cue. Participation is not just about how we participate as individuals, but it's also about understanding our environments and what role our environments play. I always say that if you want to possibly stop eating donuts, but you've got 1,000 donut stores lining the road to and from work, then your environment is not supporting that particular decision. Or if you want to read more, but every time you want to grab a book, it's right on the top shelf, you have to get onto a step to get it. That environment is causing what we call friction from you actually transitioning into the individual what you want to be or the future focused goal that you have for yourself. And this is what happens with a lot of teams. So participation is all about understanding that you and I are billboards for change, especially if you're a leader in this room. Understand that you are the best self for what this change is going to look like. Because remember that the team doesn't necessarily know where you want to go because they haven't necessarily seen what kind of animal that is. But when they understand that you are the billboard, they can see that change in your eyes when you speak and in the way that you walk and talk. It's easier for them to then understand what that may look like as it materializes. And then environment then plays an equal part. So is our environment promoting this change that we want to get? Do we have all of the correct systems and procedures that will support? Because what comes back, going back to resistance where we started, what comes back as feedback from a lot of teams that I've worked with is that the environment is not set up correctly. And unfortunately, unless this is the case, there's very, very little that you can expect from anyone who's trying to change any kind of behavior or transition from one normal, as I call it, to something completely new.
I guess part of the problem there is that a lot of people thought that this COVID disruption and the work from home that it caused us to do was temporary. So you could kind of grit your teeth, just make it through. Didn't really have to think at a deep level about some of the rituals, about some of the participation things that we needed to do. For me, you're answering one of my questions that I came into this webinar with, which is, what do we have to do for 2021? We have to acknowledge this might not be the new normal. I don't like that phrase, but it's certainly current reality for a long time, and you can't just leave it up to chance. You've got to be a little bit more deliberate about establishing the fact that this is the environment that we're in now, and then be more deliberate about crafting the culture of that environment.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And even to add to that, Graeme, I think I always say to individuals and teams that we always say, okay, harness the power of your will and get it done and be intense about and intentional about everything. But that there's only so far that can go, which is why I really wanted to communicate the message that we need to understand how people transition at an individual level. And so many leaders that have spoken to me have come back and said, Zaneli, I've done everything that I could possibly do. I don't understand. And then I go, let's go back to that. Let's go back to the fact that individuals, and I mean, look at yourself, look at how you are doing. And that already should be enough evidence that individuals don't necessarily change the way that you thought they did. There's so much more going on. And that's why I always say willpower is not enough. because the part in your brain that makes the decision to change and the part that actually facilitates the motor changes is completely different. So we really can't expect free will or harnessing the power of our will to do everything for us when it comes to making these big changes.
Sadly, we are. Yeah, we're not just going to be able to think our way into a solution for 2021. So, Zaneli, we're coming to the end of our time. I know you do a lot of work with clients in different industries now. Luckily, one of the upsides of the COVID crisis is that we also work all around the world without having to leave our homes. As you do this work with them, as you help leaders think through disruption, how to make change stick, transitions, what are some of the things that you've noticed that teams have to kind of unlearn as they plan ahead? You're the unlearning lady, and I know you've got your radar open for these things that we need to kind of leave behind us. What have you seen as people plan for 2021?
Cool. So I'm going to name two of these. So I usually like to pair them as something you need to unlearn and something you need to relearn, because that's the only way a transition actually works, is when you understand what you're leaving behind and where you're going. Because unfortunately, you can't just let go of something else if there's nothing that you're grabbing hold of. So that's the first thing. So what I want to recommend, what I've seen and picked up from teams that I've worked with, things that teams are unlearning and then needing to relearn, or even needing to relearn and needing to unlearn and having to relearn. The first one would definitely be denial. I always say we need to make the transition from denial to curiosity. Because what's happened, and I found this a lot with my clients at the beginning of COVID-19, that there was a sense of denial. You've been shaken, everything's changed, the chips have fallen, or rather the chips are in the air and you're not sure where they're going to land. And so a sense of denialism comes in, where you want to fill in the gaps around what you don't know with all of the information and the sources that may not be so great. And then you sort of go into a kind of box. So that's the first thing, is being in denial about what's going on around us, about what's going on around our horizon. And I think that's why it's today we really emphasize the future skill of horizon scanning and looking even beyond the horizon, because that's what I find that we don't do during the times of disruption. We want to keep ourselves safe, keep our assets nice and close to us, keep our team safe. But really, that's the time when we should be relearning curiosity, getting into a space where we're asking more questions and we're exploring a lot more, and we're questioning and we're looking at some of the new disruptors that have come onto the scene and could potentially not only disrupt us, but could potentially teach us something about how we need to remodel as an organization. And so that's the very first one. And then the second one, I would say,
before you go there, I just had a thought that almost feels counterintuitive, right? In a time of disruption, uncertainty, change, ambiguity, my instinct would be to tell my team, don't question anything. Just, get back to basics, do everything. But we need to think about that actually opening up curiosity, getting your team to ask, is there a better way? Can we do this differently? What are the options? Actually is a way of dealing with anxieties, of dealing with resistance, because we know the disruption is too big. You can't protect yourself against it. So almost like going out into the storm, if you like, and saying, okay, what do we do now? Is way better. I love that. So that's an unlearning. Don't take your ship back to the harbor. Sorry, we so many mixed metaphors here. But don't just try to hunker down and do the opposite. Open up curiosity and experimentation, and love it. Thank you. Okay.
So the second one then is silos to systems. Now, this one also seems a little bit obvious, but I find that a lot of teams are struggling with this at the moment. And some even know that they need to do this, but they're not too sure how to do it. So the thing to unlearn in this situation would be our silo mentalities. I worked in a workshop yesterday with a client who said, Zaneli, we're really, really going through this time of silos. Everyone has gone back into their little cages. And what they're doing is that we go, okay, so as HR, we've done everything right. It must be an R&D issue, or it must be L&D. They're doing something wrong. But on this side, we're all good. And so what we do, once again, like the denial, is we move in, we sort of bring ourselves right back into what we know, what we're familiar with, but at the cost of isolating ourselves from some of the bigger whole that's part of our ecosystems in which we work, and not just the ecosystems around the business, but even on a much larger scale. And I always encourage that we need to then relearn this kind of systems mentality, even if we don't want to necessarily go into the depth of systems thinking, which is extremely complex, but it's just this understanding of how everything is interconnected and nothing really exists in silos, but then opening ourselves up to it. Because I think looking at some of the data that's come out around the trends going into the rest of the 2020s, partnerships and understanding the power of not just merging, but partnering with other organizations, partnering with AI and cloud mobility and other forms of technology is where a lot of the power lies in this decade, in the coming disruptions as well. Is when we understand what kind of systems we can leverage and that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. And so that's what people need to relearn, and then understand some of the smart partnerships that they could bring into the organization, that they could partner with, so that they can actually move forward a lot stronger and better. Because unfortunately, certain models are not going to take us further than we are at the moment.
Zaneli, you've got to exactly the same point that every one of these webinars in the Workplace Culture 2021 series has got to. And so, I mean, there's a huge theme here that COVID is forcing us to do a few things, and we need to respond to the current COVID crisis. But actually, the things we're doing to respond to COVID are things we probably needed to have been doing anyway, because the rest of the decade is going to be disrupted by so many different things in so many different ways. If we do this COVID response right, we'll have done something smart for the rest of the decade. Listen, Zaneli, I could chat to you for hours. I always enjoy it when we do, and I'm glad that we can do some of this in public together, because your insights are really, really helpful. And I hope that people who were on this webinar, who watched this video, will connect with you and bring you into their organizations to unpack some of this knowledge, this insight, these actionable plans that you help people to do as they deal with disruption and transitions. Zaneli, I'm going to give the last word to you, and then we're going to call it quits on this webinar. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Zaneli, final word from you.
Thanks, Graeme. Just thank you so much for having me, firstly, and to everyone who's joined us and who's going to watch this as a recording. It's been an absolute pleasure. But I think the last word that I definitely want to put out to anyone who really wants to make any kind of profound change in their organizations, looking forward into 2021, but not just 2021, the rest of the 2020s, and wondering how do we strategize around that to make sure that we create a culture that's going to be forward looking. I think the main thing that I want you to take away from this is really start to understand how individuals change on an individual level, and then create environments that support the kind of change that you want, so that people can transition. And it's not going to be something that's going to be easy, because unfortunately it's not. It can be very messy in the beginning, but as you work towards it, like any kind of transition and any kind of change, as a team, you can absolutely do it, and you are equipped to make whatever changes need to be made as you look forward into whatever 2021 has in store for us.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.